save for the Tulsi Gabbard stories that I've talked about, the last two articles and this article in front of me, again, have misleading titles. It kind of makes you think that, oh, wait a minute, maybe this is what this story is trying to say, but instead it's something completely different. This is from Politico. Republicans pray for Bernie as Democratic nominee. And so when I looked at this, I was assuming, wait a minute, are they going to talk about Republican voters, or are they going to talk about Republican establishment leaders? And surprise, surprise, this article is basically talking about how key members in the Republican Party, especially in key leadership positions in Washington, D.C., want Bernie Sanders to be the nominee because they feel that it'll be easy to defeat him, that it's easy to then label other Democrats to him because he'll be a Democratic socialist. And, of course, the word Democratic socialist or socialist is bad in this country, so they'll just use that to their advantage. So I just want to give you guys an idea what this article is about. Republicans like their chances to keeping the Senate in 2020, but there's one thing that they think would seal the deal: Bernie Sanders as a Democratic presidential nominee. Some GOP incumbents are practically cheering him on, confident there's no way a self-described Democratic socialist could win a general election against President Donald Trump, and that he dragged other Democrats on the ballot with him. According to Senator Joan Ernst, Republican from Iowa, who is up for re-election next year, said it would be good for us to have a nominee like that. And a lot of other Republican leaders are excited about this, and especially since they're noticing that he's quote unquote, at least according to recent polling data, that he's trailing behind Vice President Joe Biden on the early stage. Some top Republicans said they sincerely believe Sanders has a legitimate shot at winning. Now, the thing is, what some of these Republican leaders aren't really talking about is that during the 2016 election cycle, especially during the primary, there was a lot of talk about, well, if Trump went up against Clinton or Bernie Sanders, who would defeat President Trump, or at least at the time, Trump, who was getting the nomination from the Republican Party. And according to all the polling data, Bernie Sanders was defeating President Trump, or then just Donald Trump at the time, by double digits. And no one's really acknowledging, well, why is that? Well, the thing is, when we have to look back at this presidential election cycle, Bernie Sanders was gaining a small following, not a large following, of Republican, Libertarian, conservative voters. Now, am I saying that all Republican voters are going to fall in line and vote for Bernie Sanders in a general election? No, that's not going to happen. But a key portion of Republican voters could potentially swing key election states for Bernie Sanders to win the general election against President Trump. And already we've covered this on the show in the past. Some of the CNN polling data, MSNBC polling data, where Joe Biden is in the lead against Senator Bernie Sanders, we already talked about it. They're using people who are 50 years old or older for their polling data, and some of the Republican establishment leaders are just assuming that Bernie Sanders, being a Democratic socialist, could bring down other Democrats, when in fact his involvement during the 2018 midterm election cycle, the Democrats regained the United States House from the Republicans. And granted, if things continue on, Bernie Sanders is still gaining more momentum. He already has a large infrastructure. He has the backing of Our Revolution. He has the backing of the Democratic Socialists of America and numerous other progressive and independent and grassroots organizations across the country. Bernie Sanders is able to build in crowds. When he came here to Chicago at Navy Pier, we saw a room where at least around 13,000 to 14,000 people were in there just to see Senator Bernie Sanders speak to a crowd. He's able to fill up stadiums. None of the other Democratic establishment candidates can do that. Joe Biden can't. Beto O'Rourke can't. Pete Buttigieg can't. Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, none of them can do that. But Bernie Sanders is. And the thing is, he does have some support from Republican voters. Not a whole portion of them, but I think it's ignorant for this article, and especially for some of the Republican leaders, to assume that it's easy to defeat Bernie Sanders, who has for a long time reached across the aisle and has built coalitions and has about 30 years of political experience talking to people who think different than him, but he's able to find common ground, not just this neoliberal common ground, but able to really speak to people and get their support. Now, Lainey, I kind of want to get your thoughts on this, because this article is, again, it's talking about how the Republican establishment assumes assumes that Bernie Sanders as a nominee would bring down the Democratic Party and they would have control of the Senate and House and other key states in the United States. I want to get your thoughts on this.
I would say it's at least the Republicans who are willing to speak publicly on the matter. Some of them might, be towing a certain party line right now, but actually not mind Bernie one whit. They may not mind that at all. But I think it's an interesting thing for them to be saying. I don't know if they're trying to be discouraging. I don't know whether they're just trying to put on a brave front, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
The article seems to be discouraging because the hidden tones in it is that if we have Bernie Sanders as a nominee, then we'll lose the election all over again, and that Bernie Sanders will cost the Democrats more seats of power. But who was the one who energized the base in 2018?
Yeah, we saw what happened there. We saw what happened there. And he did energize that base. And as we were just discussing, we need to get those people who didn't vote last time to vote this time. Mm-hmm. Who is going to do that? Who is going to motivate people to get their butts out of their seats and head down to the polling place?
Right. I think also we have to remember is that if as this campaign continues on, let's say in a hypothetical scenario, Bernie Sanders gets a nomination. Well, he's going to have to talk to voters in different states who think different than him. Independents and Republicans and people who just don't vote. And just as a reminder, 40% of the United States population identifies itself as independents. That's going to be a key demographic to get. But also, again, I find it interesting how the media, especially a lot of media pundits, are ignoring Republican voters, and at least a small portion of Republican voters that would vote for Bernie Sanders. That one vote from a Republican voter could turn an entire state to go to Bernie Sanders for the Electoral College. It's again, there's an assumption from the Democratic establishment and the Republican establishment that Bernie Sanders cannot win. And the thing is, we've seen the polling data from 2016 where Bernie Sanders was defeating Trump. I sometimes have to wonder what would happen if the Democratic establishment didn't commit election fraud during the 2016 primary, but I guess we'll never know. But now's the time to really show that Bernie Sanders can build a coalition, and he's capable of maintaining that coalition. But if you put in a neoliberal candidate like Joe Biden or Pete Buttigieg or Beto O'Rourke or any of the other neoliberal candidates that toe in line with establishment talking points, they can't build that coalition. Republican voters did not fall in line and just vote for Hillary Clinton. No, because they have a bad relationship and a bad memory of the Clinton administration and of just Hillary Clinton as a whole. A lot of people weren't going to vote for her. Independents, Republicans, and yes, progressives and other Democrats. I just don't see the constant media attacks by assuming just because you're hearing Republican establishment making this talking point that they can easily defeat Bernie Sanders. It's the same thing that you hear from corporate media saying that Bernie Sanders wasn't a viable candidate, when in fact his campaign is still continuing to gain momentum and he still has a strong infrastructure and a large outreach. I guess this is just another smear tactic from the establishment media to discredit Sanders. Lainey.
I'm genuinely hoping that some people come to their senses and realize the seriousness of our predicament that we're in right now and respond by giving Bernie his due and letting the voters decide who they want to vote for and who they want to get behind.
I think also what we have to take away from this is that there's going to be more articles like this, and you're going to probably see articles from the New York Times or see some video on MSNBC or CNN where you can have some Republican leader in the establishment saying that they don't want they want Bernie Sanders because they think it can easily defeat the Democrats. But just remember, at the end of the day, the Democratic and Republican establishment leaders are all friends with each other. They all take money from the same organizations: Wall Street, the big banks, corporations. They're all friends. And the one thing that frightens the establishment is somebody like Bernie Sanders, who will knock over that apple cart. And more importantly, he can build a coalition of diverse people and actually win. So there we go.
There we go.